Under the relentless Texas sun, the asphalt shimmered like a silver mirage. The midday heat hung thick in the air, wrapping around the highway like an invisible force. Sergeant Catherine Kate Lawson adjusted her sunglasses, peering at the traffic slowing to a crawl ahead. A pileup? A stranded vehicle? But as her radio crackled to life, the dispatcher's voice carried something far more unusual. Unit 214, reports of a small animal obstructing traffic on Highway 83, mile marker 143. Motorists claim it refuses to move. Please advise. Kate frowned, her years of experience telling her this wasn't just another routine call. Wildlife on the road wasn't uncommon: coyotes, armadillos, the occasional deer, but they usually darted off the moment cars approached. This one, however, was different. It wasn't running away. She flicked on her patrol lights and eased off the accelerator, bringing her cruiser to a controlled stop at the scene. A small group of drivers had gathered near the median, murmuring in confusion. Some had their phones out, recording whatever was happening. Kate stepped out, the heat slamming into her like a wave, her boots crunching against the sun-baked gravel. A middle-aged man in a faded Dallas Cowboys t-shirt wiped sweat from his brow and gestured toward the road. "Officer, you gotta see this," he said, his voice tinged with unease. Kate followed his gaze, and there it was, a bobcat kitten. Not more than a few months old, its small, spotted body was dusty from the roadside. It stood right at the edge of the median, muscles tense, tail flicking erratically. But what struck Kate wasn't just its presence, it was its behavior. The creature was pacing, making hesitant movements toward the road, then retreating, ears pinned back as if wrestling with an instinct it didn't fully understand. Something was off. Wild animals never behave this way. Kate took a slow step forward, her training kicking in. A wounded predator, even a young one, could be unpredictable. But this bobcat wasn't acting out of fear or aggression. It was deliberate, almost desperate. Then she saw it, a glint of metal. Strapped to the kitten's hind leg was a device, small, rectangular, with a blue tag attached. Her heart rate ticked up. That wasn't a wildlife tracker. It was human-made. And whatever it meant, one thing was clear. This bobcat wasn't just lost. It was trying to lead her to something. Kate's pulse quickened as she focused on the strange device strapped to the bobcat's hind leg. It was no ordinary tracking collar. This was something else entirely. The small metallic box, secured with a durable strap, had a blue marker attached, its color stark against the animal's tawny fur. Wildlife tracking devices were usually affixed around the neck, never the leg. And yet, this bobcat, barely old enough to fend for itself, carried one as if it had been deliberately placed there. But by who and why? Kate took a slow step forward, trying not to startle the animal. The bobcat flinched but held its ground, golden eyes locked onto hers. It was afraid, but it wasn't running. It was waiting. A sudden wave of unease prickled down her spine. She pressed the button on her radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 214. I have an unusual situation here. Young bobcat with what appears to be a tracking device, possibly human-issued, requesting immediate verification on wildlife tags in the area." "Copy that, Unit 214. Stand by." Kate exhaled, keeping her eyes on the bobcat as she ran through possibilities in her mind. Researchers? Unlikely. She had worked enough wildlife cases to know the standard procedures, and nothing about this fit. She turned as a white pickup truck rolled up behind her patrol car, dust curling into the air as it slowed to a stop. The logo on the door read, "Texas Parks and Wildlife Department." Dr. Mark Holloway, a seasoned wildlife biologist with sun-creased skin and sharp, calculating eyes, stepped out. He had seen his fair share of odd cases, but as he approached, his expression darkened. Kate pointed toward the bobcat. "You ever seen anything like this?" Mark lifted his binoculars, adjusting the focus. The moment he saw the device, his entire stance stiffened. "That's not ours." Kate's brow furrowed. "Meaning?" Mark lowered the binoculars, his voice carrying an edge. "Wildlife tags are regulated. This isn't standard issue." He hesitated, then added, "That blue marker? It looks like an emergency beacon, the kind issued to hikers." Kate's breath hitched. An emergency beacon. She didn't need to say it out loud. Mark's gaze met hers, and in that shared silence, the weight of the realization settled over them. Somewhere out there, someone was missing, and this bobcat was their only clue. Mark wasted no time. He pulled out his tablet, fingers moving swiftly across the screen as he accessed the regional wildlife tracking database. The sun bore down mercilessly, but neither he nor Kate paid it any mind. The bobcat still lingered nearby, pacing anxiously, its tail flicking with agitation. Kate stole another glance at the device on the animal's leg. An emergency beacon. If that was true, then someone, somewhere, needed help. Mark's face tensed as he skimmed through the system. Then suddenly, he stopped. His jaw clenched. "Damn," he muttered. Kate stepped closer. "What is it?" He turned the tablet toward her. On the screen was a missing persons report issued just that morning. Daniel Whitmore, age 42, a seasoned wildlife rehabilitator from Austin. He had checked into Fortress Ridge State Park 2 days ago for a 3-day solo expedition. He never checked back in. Kate felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "You think the beacon is his?" Mark exhaled sharply. "Look at the registration number." He enlarged the screen, pointing to a section of text. Tracking code DW7734. Kate's heart skipped a beat. Her gaze snapped back to the bobcat, still hovering near the edge of the road, staring at them expectantly. "DW," she murmured. "Daniel Whitmore. And 7734. That was his assigned campsite." Mark gave a grim nod. "It's a match. This beacon belongs to him." For a long moment, neither spoke. The realization hung heavy between them. This wasn't just a random bobcat. This wasn't just an odd encounter on the highway. This animal had come here for a reason. Kate's pulse thrummed in her ears. If this guy's been missing since yesterday, he could be in serious trouble. Mark nodded. Dehydration, injury, worse. If he was trying to signal for help and couldn't do it himself, attaching the beacon to this bobcat might have been his only chance. Kate pressed the button on her radio, her voice firm. "Dispatch, be advised, we have a confirmed missing person case linked to the wildlife incident. Possible medical emergency, requesting immediate search and rescue deployment to Fortress Ridge." "Copy that, Unit 214. Mobilizing SAR teams now." Kate turned to Mark. He was already grabbing a supply bag from his truck. "You ready for a hike?" she asked. Mark gave a tight smile. "I'd say we follow the bobcat." The animal had been waiting. The moment they took a step forward, it turned and trotted toward the dense tree line. Kate swallowed hard. Whatever they were about to find, she knew one thing for sure. This bobcat wasn't leading them into the woods for nothing. Kate's boots crunched against the dry underbrush as she followed the bobcat into the dense forest. The midday sun, once oppressive on the open highway, barely pierced through the thick canopy of oaks and junipers. The sudden drop in temperature sent a chill down her spine. Or maybe it was something else. The unsettling feeling that they were walking into the unknown. Beside her, Mark Holloway moved with the practiced ease of a man who had spent a lifetime navigating the wild. He clutched his backpack tightly, his gaze darting between the bobcat and the forest ahead. The animal moved with precision, keeping just far enough ahead that they could follow, but never so far that they lost sight of it. Every so often it stopped, glancing back them with an urgency that sent a knot tightening in Kate's gut. "This is incredible," Mark murmured. "Wild bobcats don't act like this. It's leading us." Kate didn't need to be told twice. Everything about this situation defied logic. This wasn't random animal behavior. This was intent. As they ventured deeper, the terrain grew uneven. The forest floor, littered with fallen leaves and gnarled roots, made each step a calculated effort. Kate's training kept her alert, but the silence was unnerving. The usual forest sounds, chirping birds, rustling leaves, had vanished, replaced by an eerie quiet. Then she saw it. Tracks! Boot prints. Fresh. She crouched, tracing her fingers lightly over the indentation in the dirt. "These are recent," she said, her voice low. "Men's hiking boots, size 11 or 12. Mark knelt beside her, his expression tightening. "Could be Whitmore's." The bobcat let out a soft, urgent cry, its tail flicking anxiously. Then, without warning, it bolted forward, disappearing behind a thicket of trees. Kate's instincts screamed at her to move. She pushed forward, branches snapping against her uniform as she and Mark picked up the pace. And then they saw it. A clearing, disturbed. Trampled grass, a torn backpack strap, and blood. Kate's stomach clenched. The bobcat stood at the edge of the ravine just ahead, its body tense. It looked back at them, then toward the steep drop. Mark exhaled sharply. Something happened here. Kate took a slow step forward, peering over the edge. 30 feet below, partially obscured by a fallen tree, lay a motionless figure. And then he moved. "We found him," Kate whispered. "He's alive." The motionless figure beneath the fallen tree barely stirred, but it was enough. He was alive! "Daniel Whitmore!" she called, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. There was no immediate response. Then, slowly, an arm lifted, weak and trembling, as if even that small movement took every ounce of strength he had left. Mark sucked in a sharp breath beside her. "He's conscious, but barely." Kate pressed her radio. "Dispatch, we've located the missing hiker. Ravine approximately 1 mile east of Highway 83, near mile marker 143. Subject is alive but injured. Request immediate medical evacuation." "Copy that, Unit 214. Search and rescue is en route. ETA 45 minutes. 45 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. Kate scanned the terrain. The slope was steep, but not impossible. "I'm going down," she said, already securing her footing. Mark grabbed her arm. "I should go first. I've got the medical kit." She hesitated, but nodded. Mark was the one trained in field medical emergencies. As he made his way down carefully, using the trees and exposed roots for support, the bobcat, the same animal that had led them here, began making its way down as well. It moved with the grace only a wild predator could manage, leaping effortlessly from rock to rock, never losing its balance. Kate followed, more cautiously, her focus never leaving Daniel. His face was pale, lips dry and cracked from dehydration. His right leg was pinned beneath the heavy tree limb, and the ground around him bore the dark stains of dried blood. Mark knelt beside him, immediately checking his pulse and vitals. "Daniel, can you hear me?" A weak groan. Kate crouched on his other side, reaching for her water bottle. "Here, take small sips." Daniel's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then widening in recognition. Not at them, but at the bobcat now sitting just a few feet away, watching. A breathless whisper escaped his lips. "Nova, good girl." Kate exchanged a stunned look with Mark. "Nova!" He knew this animal. Mark worked quickly, assessing the injuries. Compound fracture in the right tibia, signs of dehydration, possible concussion. "We need to move him, but that leg is going to be a problem." Kate's stomach tightened. Time was running out, and help was still 45 minutes away. But Nova had found them once. They just had to keep him alive until backup arrived. Mark worked quickly, stabilizing Daniel's leg as best he could with the supplies he had. The fracture was bad, but not life-threatening, if they could keep him conscious and hydrated until search and rescue arrived. Kate knelt beside Daniel, watching as his eyes fluttered open again. His breathing was shallow, labored, but there was something else in his expression. Not just pain, relief. His gaze shifted past them, locking onto the bobcat sitting a few feet away. "Nova," he whispered, voice raw from dehydration. "She did it." Kate exchanged a glance with Mark. "You know this bobcat?" Daniel swallowed, his throat dry, but he nodded. "She's mine. Not as a pet," he added, voice faint but determined. Rescue, rehab, was preparing her for full release. He coughed, wincing as pain shot through his body. "I was tracking her, final assessment before letting her go." Mark furrowed his brows. "Then what happened?" Daniel took a slow, shaky breath. "Storm came in fast. Lightning hit a tree nearby. Scared her. She bolted." His eyes flickered with frustration, the helplessness of the moment still fresh. "I followed. That's when the tree came down." He gestured weakly toward the massive trunk still pinning his leg. Kate exhaled sharply, the weight of the situation settling over her. "And the beacon?" Daniel managed a weak smile. "Didn't have the strength to reach my radio, but I had the tracking marker. Figured if she made it to the road, someone would notice." His gaze flickered toward Nova again, admiration in his tired eyes. "I wasn't sure she'd go, but she did." Mark let out a low whistle. "So you trained a bobcat to lead a rescue mission?" Daniel let out something between a laugh and a grimace. "Not exactly, just worked with her instincts. Taught her that roads meant humans. Humans meant help. Guess it stuck." Kate looked at Nova. The small but fierce creature that had stopped traffic on a highway, waited for a cop to arrive, and led them straight to a man who would have died alone in the wilderness, if not for her. It was more than training. It was trust. Nova had chosen to come back, to help. And now, because of her, Daniel had a chance to live. The story of Nova and Daniel Whitmore spread faster than anyone had anticipated. By the time Daniel had been airlifted out of the ravine and stabilized at the hospital, the media had already caught wind of the incredible rescue. A wild bobcat saving a man's life? It was the kind of story that captured people's imaginations and challenged everything they thought they knew about the relationship between humans and wildlife. Kate sat in her cruiser 2 days later, scrolling through the headlines on her phone. Man's life saved by bobcat he rehabilitated. Unlikely hero, how a rescued bobcat became a lifeline. The animal that refused to leave its human behind. She exhaled, shaking her head. She'd spent over a decade in law enforcement, seen her fair share of strange cases, but nothing quite like this. The idea of a bobcat not just surviving in the wild, but actively seeking out help for a human, it defied conventional wisdom. But maybe, she thought, conventional wisdom had been wrong. The rescue had done more than save Daniel's life. It had sparked a national conversation about wildlife rehabilitation, intelligence, and the complex bond between animals and the people who helped them. Calls flooded into conservation organizations, donations poured in, and suddenly, people who had never thought twice about animals like Nova were asking questions. Could some wild animals form selective bonds with humans? Could they learn to communicate in ways that weren't just instinctual? And most importantly, what else had people been getting wrong? Daniel, still recovering from his injuries, wasted no time pushing for change. In a public statement, he emphasized that Nova wasn't a pet, nor was she an anomaly. She was proof that wildlife rehabilitation needed a new approach, one that accounted for the unique cases where an animal existed between two worlds, wild and human. That's when the idea was born. A wildlife ambassador program, a place where animals like Nova, who couldn't be fully released, could still serve a purpose. Instead of being kept in isolation or captivity, they would help educate the public, shape conservation efforts, and prove that the relationship between humans and wildlife wasn't as simple as most believed. And Nova, she would be the first ambassador, the face of a movement that no one saw coming. 6 months later, Kate Lawson stood among a gathered crowd, watching as the ribbon was cut for the grand opening of the Texas Wildlife Ambassador Center. The sun cast golden light over the sprawling facility, 20 acres of carefully designed habitats, each crafted to house animals that, for one reason or another, could never return fully to the wild. But they weren't just here to survive. They were here to teach, to inspire, to change how people understood the natural world. At the center of it all was Nova. Daniel Whitmore, now fully recovered, took the podium. His voice carried through the crowd, recounting his near-death experience, the bond he had formed with Nova, and the way this bobcat had challenged scientific assumptions about wildlife behavior. Kate listened, arms crossed, nodding slightly as he spoke. She had been there. She had followed Nova through the wilderness, had felt that eerie certainty that the animal knew what it was doing. It still defied logic, but standing here, watching the results unfold in front of her, she knew one thing. Nova had saved more than just Daniel that day. She had saved an idea, a new way of thinking about how humans and wildlife could coexist. After the speeches concluded, Kate found herself standing in front of Nova's enclosure. It was no cage. Her space was expansive, designed to mimic the terrain she would have roamed in the wild. Rocks, trees, a running stream. The only thing separating them was a reinforced observation glass, and even that felt thin in the moment. Nova sat atop a rocky outcrop, watching the visitors with those intelligent golden eyes. She had grown since that day on the highway. Sleek, powerful, every inch the predator she was meant to be. And yet, when her gaze fell on Kate, there was recognition. The bobcat stood, stretched, and approached the glass. Kate let out a slow breath, stepping closer. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, in a gesture that sent a strange warmth through Kate's chest, Nova let out a soft chuffing sound, a greeting, a thank you. Kate smirked, shaking her head. "You really are something else, aren't you?" She turned, glancing back at Daniel, who was watching with quiet amusement. "She's done more for conservation in 6 months than most programs do in a decade," he said. Kate nodded, looking once more at Nova. "Yeah," she murmured, "and I get the feeling she's just getting started." As Kate walked away from Nova's enclosure, she couldn't shake the profound realization settling in her chest. This one bobcat, once abandoned, once just another wild animal struggling to survive, had done something extraordinary. She had bridged the gap between humans and nature, proving that wildlife was far more intelligent, intuitive, and connected to us than most people believed. Nova's story wasn't just about survival. It was about trust, resilience, and the bond that could exist between species when given the chance. It was a reminder that the natural world isn't separate from us. It's part of us, and the way we treat it, the way we respect and protect it, defines the future for all living things. How many other animals just like Nova are out there, misunderstood, abandoned, or suffering because of human actions? How many species have voices we haven't yet learned to hear? Kate turned back one last time, watching as Nova moved effortlessly through her habitat. It only takes one act of compassion to change a life, human or animal. Maybe, just maybe, if we listen more, care more, and protect more, we can change the world. Because nature is watching. The question is, will we answer?